This meeting is being recorded.
All right, thanks everyone for joining this GIS open forum for vulnerability assessment work. And just to let you all know, the purpose of this open forum is TBRPC was awarded what is called an RRE grant. It's a Regional Resilience Entity Grant to facilitate technical assistance and collaboration in the region for vulnerability assessment. So we just thought internally these open forums to just kind of get the real deal from people actually doing this kind of work would be helpful for FDEP. I'd also like to just, maybe go around the room really quick. I know everybody put their stuff in the chat, but just, say who you are, maybe what vulnerability assessment you are working on, or anything else you might want to quickly add before we get into the meat of the conversation. So I'll start. My name's Ashley. I work at TBRPC as a GIS manager. Currently, I'm working on vulnerability assessments for citrus in Hernando County. And I'm also trying to work on this technical assistance grant. Megan, would you like to go next?
Yeah. Hey, everyone. I'm Megan Blanchard. I'm a coastal ecologist with TBRPC, but I'm helping Amy and Ashley with vulnerability assessment resources like this open forum and packaging that for FDEP. And I'm happy to be able to see where our resources can take you guys next.
Allie, you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, guys. I'm Allie, Pinellas County government. So we're doing a VA for our unincorporated areas. Then as of recently, sorry, I always forget. I gotta put this thing down there. It's opposite. We just started, we will be doing an additional 10 communities because they didn't have the capacity to seek funding and have staff to do it. They're really small. So it ends up being like 9 coastal communities and then one of our larger cities, Pinellas Park. So we're in the process of starting our stakeholder engagement right now.
Great. USF, do you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Allison Bednar.
Maggie Winter.
We're with Florida Center for Community Research and Design. We're working on the Hillsborough County vulnerability assessment, and we are completing our exposure and sensitivity analysis. Our other GIS folks are trying to finish their rain part of the data, but we have completed the sea level rise and storm surge portion, and we are about to start our second engagement.
Great. Hey, Dylan, did you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Dylan, City of Holmes Beach Public Works, and we're doing our comprehensive vulnerability assessment, both the planning and the implementation side.
Great. Thanks, Dylan. Crystal?
Hey, everybody. I'm Crystal Goodison from the Geoplan Center at the University of Florida. So we're a GIS shop. I'm currently helping Ashley on her citrus and Hernando vulnerability assessments. But in general, we build a lot of statewide tools and standardized data to help with lots of different projects, sea level rise, vulnerability, transportation. So happy to sort of hear what others' experiences are and see if we can help make anything to help.
Great. And Russ, you're the last man standing.
So I'm Russ Watkins. I'm in a mega corp of one Threshold Spatial Science. I've done a couple of these things, and I'm complicating Ashley's life on her effort at the moment for citrus and Hernando and regionally as well.
Yeah, just for the others on the call, I was thinking it'd be kind of maybe helpful to explain how I'm using Russ's help and the GeoPlan Center's help. So Russ has been, because I've never done a vulnerability assessment up until now, Russ has been kind of guiding me through the process since he's done them for other communities. And then Crystal and company are acting as our third-party review. So as I work through the process, I'll send what I got to Crystal and they, you know, do QC and make recommendations and that kind of stuff. So it's helpful for me. I have a lot of eyeballs on my work to make sure I'm not going off the rails. Okay, great. So I was gonna hop right into it. I do have an agenda, which I realize is kind of contrary to the spirit of an open forum, but I just have a few things to get through that I'm hoping will benefit you all in the long run. So just some kind of housekeeping stuff. TBRPC is working to provide some technical assistance products right now and some data. So Allison, something that you said that got me thinking was it sounds like y'all are working on rain data. I'm really interested to hear about that. I am working on another project that is external to like FDEP funded vulnerability assessments that is going to produce rainfall products. And I'm hoping that you all wouldn't mind me just showing you like it's 4 slides and then we can talk. But I just wanted to make you aware of this project. And, you know, I'm also, to be totally transparent, I'm kind of the checking the box on some stakeholder engagement right now. So please, if you don't mind, just a couple minutes and I'll tell you about this project and then hopefully maybe we can get it to how it could benefit you. So I'm just going to share really quick. Hopefully you all can see the pretty version of.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Good.
So again, this is like 4 or 5 slides. I'm going to make this quick so not to take up too much of our time. So the project's called Advancing Mitigation, Assessment, and Planning through Regional Collaboration. The project background is that there's 6 RPCs participating. East Central Florida is the lead, and they were awarded $1.5 million from the DEO for this 3-year project that focuses on future extreme rainfall for inland and coastal communities. And the project outcomes that are relevant to this group are it's going to deliver like future extreme rainfall modeling to support VAs, and then further down the line is going to provide a regional resilience exposure tool in the form of a web application. And East Central Florida RPC, they put together a technical advisory committee to develop the guidance to model future extreme rainfall events. And that was folks from the Flood Hub, from UF, FIU, and the South Florida Water Management District. Just a couple more slides. And that rainfall technical advisory committee, they came up with some guidance. I can send anybody this slide that may want it. And I have,
Please
okay.
do.
Yeah, I definitely will. And I have kind of a technical I don't know what it's sort of just a technical write-up of, you know, how the group came to their decisions and who was involved. So you might be able to incorporate that into your work. So yeah, I'll send you all this after the meeting. And
Just a quick question, Ashley. So since NOAA released and the new bill was signed, are you guys changing it from 2050 and 2080 now?
Yeah, so that was something I have a couple notes on this in my notes sections of the PowerPoint. Is that something that's kind of crazy about this project that I think it started 4 years ago. It started before I even began working at TBRPC, but I think the deal is that DEO was slow to fund the project. So, and then after the project started, then Resilient Florida happened. So East Central Florida, you know, has worked the last couple of years to align the project with what FDEP wants, but now that the guidance has changed, that's something that, you know, they're like, okay, the goalpost is over here. You know, now we gotta change those planning horizons. So that's something that's in the works.
Okay.
But the data that I'm gonna work on in the next few weeks is, you know, these time horizons or planning horizons. But hopefully, you know, we can adjust to meet the new horizons that FDEP is looking at. All right. And so yeah, like you could use the TAC guidance or actually my predecessor at TBRPC, Marshall Flynn, he's the consultant on this project that built the tool that is creating the GIS outputs, and he calls it Inundate. And it's incorporating that TAC guidance into the parameters, and it, you know, it creates the flood extents and the depths. And so you can look at that and to determine where extreme rain events can happen. And just something to keep in mind, it is considered regional or planning scale.
Ashley, is it open source? Is it
That's
something that-
something that I don't have the particulars from East Central Florida on that. Like I can certainly run it for people. I just don't know if I'm allowed to distribute it.
Gotcha.
But you know, if you're interested in it, Allie, like I would definitely help to facilitate the work,
Okay.
you know, however that needs to happen. And also not violating any, you know, contract terms that Marshall might have with East Central Florida.
Gotcha. Cool.
Okay, and then, all right, we're almost at the end here. So the next steps for that project is I'm gonna work over the next few weeks to produce those GIS data sets, and I'm gonna create countywide maps for each of the 6 TBRPC counties. And you know, as we were just talking about, like my hope is that we can work with the project partners to align the project with the new planning horizons. And it sounds like I might be able to squeeze a couple stakeholders out of this group, maybe Allison and Allie. You could look at the countywide maps and the data that I produce and, you know, see what you think and let me know. So that's all I had in terms of that project. And I'm gonna send the group afterwards the slides, so you have those change factors and all that kind of stuff. So I'm gonna stop sharing.
Hey, Ashley,
Yeah,
I'd be interested from Allison and Maggie from the rainfall work that they're doing, sort of, yeah, comparing what this
Yeah.
regional scale looks like to get, yeah, is it within the ballpark?
right.
But are y'all, Allison and Maggie, using 2050 and 2080 or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So we actually had a meeting a couple days ago with Dr. Kendall Jackson. He's running the primary model for the rain, and he's using a Copenhagen
The cloudburst modeling.
yes.
And full disclosure, he's doing it, he's doing it as a test to see if it works. It seemed like the most accurate, but that modeling system is for a small city like Copenhagen, right? So Hillsborough County is a little different context.
Totally.
So he's excited about it. He's using NOAA's most recent data, and he's hoping it works. He said probably another week or two to see how it pans out. So we haven't seen any results yet from Kendall.
I think what we were hoping from those results is that it would give us, so we have a combined raster with sea level rise and rain and
Storm surge.
yeah, and storm surge. And what we
Yeah.
were hoping was that we could use a raster calculator and combine the two with whatever rain outputs he has with the sea level rise and storm surge to get an overall flooding. But if that doesn't work, I think there might be like, he called them blue spots, but what I think they're more like hot spots where there would be more rain. I think that was what, he's not here to help with the actual methodology, but from what I understand it, that's what the next steps for us are.
Yeah, so if this meeting were a week from now, we would probably be able to contribute more feedback on this. But I think at any rate, I think it will be really interesting to compare kind of how, Ashley, what your output, how it compares to this. Like we're
Definitely.
happy to be
Yeah.
guinea pigs in that.
No, I would appreciate that
great.
very much.
Yeah, I
I'm
think this
very
is
curious.
Yeah, and I think this has been the like one of the most difficult things about the rainfall piece is like the scaling of it. Like it's usually done at such a small scale, city scale or
Right.
smaller that, but yeah, and then we're dealing with regional assessment. So how do we produce something with the money that we have that's good enough that, yeah, it's kind of a cluster.
Yeah, so our vulnerability assessment, we're coordinating with Dewberry Consultants. They're
Nice.
doing the LMS for the county.
Great.
And they have a number of projects that are like inland and northern areas that are just rainfall. And they have another way that they usually do it. So, and I don't know enough to speak with specificity about that, but that is another fallback that we kind of have to go back on. I don't know, Crystal, if you have any words of wisdom on this moving forward, but yeah, with the regional areas and the infrastructure component where it's like, how are your drainage ditches working, right? Even that is just such a huge hitch in the function.
I don't have any words of wisdom, and it's funny because Russ and I were on the technical advisory committee for this rainfall project early on, and I'm not a rainfall expert. I'm a planner and a GIS person, and I do sea level rise stuff. And I think this is a point where FDEP and the Flood Hub could really take point and give us guidance on what is the right scaling for these things, knowing that there's a finite amount of money, and that really these assessments are supposed to be a sort of a conservative estimate of what might be impacted. And then when you move to the implementation plan, that's when, sort of the fine scale modeling and the design work needs to be really tight. So giving communities guidance on what the right level and scale is, I think, I think that would be.
Yeah, the bill specifically says to utilize the Flood Hub, but there's nothing on the Flood.
But we're going in like this circle of,
yeah.
So yeah, we're all just kind of like muddling through it together. And it's difficult because you get really good, companies like Dewberry that they're used to doing engineering level stuff. These are planning level projects though, and so sort of that trying to communicate that our level of accuracy is not as tight as what it needs to be for them. It's challenging. Russ, did you want to weigh in there? Words of wisdom?
Yeah, I generally agree with you. The Copenhagen model, I'm not totally familiar with that, but that will be interesting to see the difference in scale maybe of that model versus kind of the East Central Florida approach, which is using the global climate models. But overall, following on what Crystal said, is this stuff, the precip is just really to give you an indication of where potential, as Allison said, hotspots are, right? And yeah, until depending on what your goal is with the vulnerability analysis, if you're kind of trying to point towards the possibility of mitigation, construction planning money, that's really where you're going to get into the more detail on the rainfall, and it's rainfall anyway. It's crazy. So, but one other thing to add, just to kind of complicate the mix a little, another thing that's going on, and that was interesting, listening to Allison and Maggie about how you're combining multiple sources. So you're getting towards kind of this compound, flooding issue, right? So Northeast Florida Regional Council has convened this group to also talk about compound flooding and different ways to go at it, and that's an ongoing conversation. So
I
I-
would say, yeah, on the like combination raster, the only thing I would think about is the difference between a periodic flooding event and a permanent flooding event, right? So sea level rise, new coastline. And then the periodic ones, thinking about how you weave those in.
Yeah, it was just a discussion because we already had them combined and there's so many assets. I don't know Allie with Pinellas or Ashley with Hernando and Pasco, but or Citrus. We added a lot of assets to our vulnerability assessment, not just the ones the state. So we have to see how tedious it would be to combine all those and then do it.
Yeah.
So it's still a work in progress if we will end up combining, because you're totally right with the periodic and the changing. But sea level rise and storm surge are definitely together on ours.
Allie, are you looking at rain in a different way that you wanted to share?
So I'm definitely not the right person to speak on the methodology, but I know that we do have a countywide precip model, and I can find more information on that, how it was conducted. Along with precip, we also wanted to incorporate groundwater. So those were optional tasks on our scope, but Pinellas County, we're so unique. We're 98% built out, completely surrounded by water. So groundwater and precip is like really important to take into consideration for us, because it can elevate that temporary flooding quite a bit, especially those like inland areas. So that's on the optional tasks. And I know that we have countywide data that I think came out of the LMS or a separate study that might have been, it was a FEMA study, grant funded. So I can get more information on it and the methodology specifically. But yeah, we have a lot of assets because I didn't really know the list was so broad that we just included literally anything that we owned, from like valves till buildings.
Yeah, we did too. Ours is,
Okay.
and then we also added socio-demographic as like a
Nice.
fifth broad category.
Awesome.
But yes, we have the whole conveyance system and
Yeah, same. And
yeah.
it's like, I don't know what to say about the vertical system. What are we going to tell them? Like, it's underwater.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
right.
don't
That's what
really know.
I'm saying. The maps will tell the story. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I feel like DEP definitely missed an opportunity, or at least, maybe we could have done some more of regional collaboration where we did identify our data sources first, because Pinellas County is very affluent. We have a lot of funding. We've been able to get very specific modeling for our area. And now with the updates, I feel like they went more generic. And so our models are actually custom. And so they don't fit some of the standards that came out of that statute. And we're kind of waiting on guidance. We're not making any changes until we see some sort of documentation come from the state that says, like, you can get grandfathered in or XYZ. And just to give you an example, we had completed a vulnerability assessment back in 2021 or 2022. And then we didn't have intermediate high. So the reason that we actually applied for the planning funds was to go back and interpolate our intermediate high. And now that's gone and we're back to intermediate. And we already paid the consultant for the intermediate high. So I'm like, we need to get
If it
paid.
makes you feel any better, we're doing high, not intermediate high, but we are doing high. And then we also have some maps of the 14 feet storm surge from a Hurricane Ian
Nice.
scenario.
Yeah.
Which is horrible.
Yeah.
Like McDill gone. But I want to let you know Hillsborough County is also adding on to what the state's requiring. So you guys are not the only
Yeah.
one.
I just feel like we're gonna have a lot of scenarios here, and we'll just run them all, and then we just need to figure out as a region which ones we're gonna start using as a planning guideline. So it's interesting. We ended up actually adopting our I think the we adopted the high 100-year storm surge scenario into our floodplain ordinance. I think that was the one, but we adopted one of the models that came out of the VA phase 1 that we conducted in 2021, 2022. So now it's like in our policy. So to go back and do the updates is just been really challenging.
So just for clarification, then you're talking about the sort of revised or updated statute and the changes that occurred, right?
Correct.
The previous one,
House
right?
Bill 1557.
Yeah, so, I mean, my understanding, but this is yet to be confirmed, and I think it's good that everyone's thinking about it and talking about it, because maybe somebody will find out for sure. But my understanding was that the new standards apply to VAs that are initiated after whenever that thing is supposed to be.
July 1st.
First, right? So if you've completed or are in the process prior to, then, I mean, then
Yeah.
it's not an issue, but it
So
would be kind of silly if it was an issue, so.
yeah, so well, I have heard multiple things, and that's why I want to see in writing, because I've heard a lot of things.
Right, no,
And
that would be good.
yeah, we had an FMA grant from it was a hold on, CDBG MIT. You guys know what I'm talking about.
Acronym soup.
Yeah. That kind of was a similar scenario where they're like, nope, you're good to go with this methodology. You know, we had it in writing from them, and then they went back and changed. So these things happen, and that's fine that things change, but we need it in writing.
Yeah.
We need, just because
Totally.
we've already spent money and now we're spending more money. So it's just a little hairy of a situation. Like either way, it's going to come out with a great product. We're going to have a planning document. We're going to know what we need to go moving forward. It just would be really cool if we all had aligned, because now we have all these VAs executed at different times.
Yeah.
So with the unincorporated, we're already in the beginning. We've done the data collection. We're starting the stakeholder engagement because we adopted these 10 municipalities. Now we're doing an amendment to the grant. They want to execute it as a separate grant. So then we might have one that can be with the old statute requirements and one that might be with the new one. So it's just interesting. I mean, I'm sure the
Yeah.
data is all very similar, and like you said, it's supposed to be a conservative model, so it should be fine.
Yeah. And I'd be like, I'm a little surprised. Maybe this will come out later, but if you've done the intermediate high, you should be good. If we're now going to intermediate, like, okay,
Yeah.
we're good.
Yeah, like it
You don't need
hits.
a remodel because
Yeah.
this is the most conservative, and
Yeah, we used all of
That's a
the
good
20.
point.
We used all of the 2017 NOAA, and actually our storm surge modeling came out of UF. Dr.
Shang.
Shang had actually incorporated it. It consisted over like 176 storms, localized storms. So it's like a very specific
Yeah,
high resolution
local.
model. Yeah.
It's
And
got
now
good
they're
stuff.
saying, oh, you didn't use FEMA. So okay, was
Well,
this
it's
better than
crazy. Yeah, I
FEMA?
know. His is definitely better than FEMA.
So I don't know. Like, what do you guys want?
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting. Yeah.
Interesting.
I have a million other topics I'd like to cover, but I don't want to squash any conversation about rain if y'all want to keep going, but let me know if you're ready to pivot.
Yeah, like I
Go
said,
for it.
I'll definitely look up the model that we have that's countywide. I'm happy to share that if I'm able to with you guys.
Yeah, Ally, I'd like to, also compare to what I produced for that that other CDBG MIT project that I showed you the PowerPoint slides for. I want to see, like that would be really interesting. I wasn't even aware of that project, so
Yeah.
that'll be great. Something else I was hoping to hear from the group, so I'll give you some context for where I'm coming from. So going into the Citrus and Hernando VAs, we were like, hey, we should look at high tide flooding. I learned through East Central Florida RPC that they had used, it's a guy named Dr. Jason Evans. He works at Stetson University. He's done that kind of work, modeling for East Central for vulnerability assessment. So we contracted to have him do that work for Citrus and Hernando, and we thought, well, at the same time, we'll just do all the counties, because we figured if he's, you know, head down doing the work, why not just knock them all out? And you know, he's looking at those you know, the current planning horizon, so 2040, 2070. But I wanted to let you all know that that's something that we're going to be delivering June 1st to FDEP. So if you have any interest in looking at those data sets, you're more than welcome to them. I can stay in touch about that, but I've received the preliminary data. Crystal and Russ have looked over the methodology and looking pretty good there. And I don't know if, you know, I'm definitely open to, you know, doing further work with Jason on that for any, you know, new guidance that comes out too. So I was hoping to find out from you all what you were doing for high tide flooding, what you were looking at and how you were approaching it, if anybody wanted to share.
I'm just gonna pull up my tech memo so I can remember what we did. Like I know we did mean high water. We did the 1 hour per year.
Oh, we're using mean high water. That's what, I think that's what, I'm gonna pull up our thing as well.
Or maybe the 2 feet above.
Oh yeah, we didn't do that.
Okay.
We were accounting for that.
Yeah, I think they used a gauge in Clearwater and a gauge in St. Pete, and then they did like an interpolation between those two. So there's like some areas that are above that 2 feet. There are some that are a little below, because again, we were going for accuracy, but now that it's just the arbitrary 2 feet, I know, it's like, I don't know. So now we're just gonna download whatever we have to and add on 2 feet. I don't know. I mean, I think we're gonna be able to get an exemption. We wrote like our methodology and we sent you know, all of our tech memos to their coastal review team, and we're actually waiting just them to say like, yeah, we can use our data, and we just haven't received a response yet. But I'm really hoping that we can, because it's great data. If not, then we do have options to just you know, use the NOAA site for the mean high water and then add on the 2 feet based on the year. So
Yeah, that 2 feet thing came to my attention after we contracted with Stetson University to produce that data. So, but yeah, I think it's a much better product for sure. Like, I'm happy that we have it. Russ, did you want to add anything here? It's okay if you don't want to.
You know me, I'm full of opinions, so I'll maybe reserve my opinion on this
you're
one.
being recorded.
They're being recorded. Yeah.
Just kidding.
I
Anyway,
think, yeah, I think DEP was trying to simplify things by saying 2 feet above mean
Yes.
high water, but
yeah, that's it. That's what they were doing. Yeah.
that's what they were doing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's yeah, interesting that in some places, yeah, NOAA's and National Weather Service have already set those thresholds. 1.8 feet is their minor high tide flooding threshold,
Yeah.
which is just under. So, you know, they're trying to get in the ballpark.
Yeah.
But I think there should be an exemption, right? Like if you've
Yeah.
modeled your area for more precisely for high tide flooding, that should be good, you know? If you
Yeah.
haven't, then maybe just use the 2 feet.
And again, anything that's under the 2 feet, I guess, you know, maybe you're not seeing that inundation. So wouldn't that be saving, or not like saving their implementation funds, but it's showing, if you're adding 2 feet, you're showing things are inundated when they might not
When they might not be.
necessarily
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
inundated.
Yep,
So
exactly.
yeah.
Yep. And every inch counts in Florida.
Yeah. But I really did enjoy, out of the phase 1, and we're doing it again, was the king tide, the 1 hour per year. because that's something that in our area everybody knows about king tide because it does come annually and it is really impactful. It even if some assets are inundated for a couple hours, it can be catastrophic. So it's a good one to talk about to get people to understand the tidal
Mhm.
flooding. So we really had great conversation with the public when talking about the king tide,
Nice. That's good feedback.
which originally we were doing hours, but now that I say that, I think we're supposed to be displaying that as days per year. Is that correct?
Typically, well, yeah, high tide flooding, like king tides are like one type of high tide flooding. And yeah, we typically think about them as a frequency, like how many
Frequency.
days per year
Yes.
are you kind of reaching, these tides?
Yeah, and so all of ours were displayed in hours, so I think they just also have to update that so it's in days. Which I was
Well,
like,
pragmatically, I mean, if you're trying to get, like, educate the, population, days is much better than hours. Just, you got to give them something simple that they can
yep,
wrap their
Mhm.
heads around and, something tangible.
yep.
All right. So people don't think about hours. It's without getting off on a tangent, but it's just even like sea level rise. You talk to people about millimeters a year and whatever,
That's a good point.
Right.
Yes.
You have to give. So to me, and I can't help but get slightly philosophical here because it's really interesting to have the collection of local governments and academics working to help local governments and the guidance from DEP as spotty as it might be should leave room, a confidence interval around different methodologies so that local governments can use the best data they can get to solve their issues and not just meet the, you know, requirements in the statute.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah, I
all.
think with those, I totally agree with you, Russ. I think those statutes can just get a little intimidating and be very like prescriptive. So
Yeah,
Mhm.
we're not just checking boxes. I mean, you can just check a box, sure, but wouldn't it be so much more valuable to take that money and produce a plan and data that's actually useful and relevant
yes.
for your
Yeah,
mission?
and what's the goal? What are we trying to look at?
Yeah, because we are going to see this patchwork of, all different sorts of methods and models, and we standardized on some of the fundamentals, but yeah. Anyway, just an observation.
Well, and the end goal is to combine them all. So, I mean, they're going to
Well,
have
yeah, but that's
combining. That's going to, yeah, I get.
So someday the flood hub's going to save us. That's what I
One
should make
day.
a bumper sticker there. Because we do need some statewide models. You can come up with some very reasonable statewide models that give an approximation that everyone can use and benefit from. And then when you get to the point where you're actually dealing with these on the ground site specific problems, you can do more detailed modeling, right? So
Yeah, it does
that
seem,
would be ideal, but
yeah, if there would have been a statewide exposure analysis done at first, like, I just feel like that would have saved a lot of time.
They could have paid one consultant a lot of money and saved money, right?
Yeah,
Think
I
about
think
all
so.
these different
Right.
model it all and then send it back to people. And
well, yeah, give you something to start with at least, right? And also that helps people understand what the process is, and so what the methodologies are, so they understand how they can do it and apply it in a more local basis.
And I think just down to a basic asset level, there's a lot of governments out there that don't even have asset management.
yeah,
So, with these municipalities that we're taking on, it's like paper maps. We're gonna be
yeah,
digitizing a lot of stuff.
yeah.
So even if they had just started with like guidance on how to start with asset management, would have been
Yeah, or
great
some
step.
additional, maybe even some additional grants for those tiny municipalities that don't have digital databases.
Right. Right. And then,
Let's
you
build it.
know, I remember when I first had the meeting with their GIS contact pulling up their statewide data set, and they had, again, all of these assets displayed, and some of them are sensitive. Like, we really shouldn't be displaying them to the public, which is when I think Ashley had told you we contacted them and we had add an attribute to our geodatabase that's public disclosure, yes or no. Because there's just certain things we just don't display.
Right.
So just having the conversation about the GIS assets first and foremost, what they really wanted since the categories were so broad.
Mhm.
Definitions would have been helpful there.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Agree.
And then there's elevation certificates. That's another topic.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'll
like
get to that, Russ.
how's everybody doing elevation? Because
Yeah,
again,
that's the next topic. I want to say bye
Good,
to
good.
Crystal because she's
Yeah,
got to
I'm sorry I have to jump. I got to run to an appointment, but I'm like, oh, I want to. Now we're getting into elevation.
Yeah.
You know, I'm a nerd when I want to stay for that.
Thank you, Crystal.
Thank you, everybody. This was really
Thank you.
good talking
Thank
to you
you,
all.
Crystal.
See you.
Yeah, I want to jump to that elevation topic just in a second, Allie, but I wanted to say something about high tide flooding that I thought was cool because Jason from Stetson that's giving us the high tide data, he did the days too. And I think it was Palm Beach Gardens maybe that did their VA, and I really liked some of the visuals they did where they, just kind of like color coded by days. I felt that was like more useful than, like it's kind of weird the depths thing, because it could
Yeah.
not be there in certain days.
Could you share
but
that with us? I'd like to see that.
yeah, I'll see if I can dig that up, but I thought it was really cool. One of Crystal's colleagues had showed me that and I was like, whoa, that's super useful. It was just like a really easy way to visualize it. But yeah, Russ, that was a good segue, the elevation thing.
Sorry. That's one of
I
my-
know it was great because I wanted to share like in terms of elevation certificates, like my journey. So like in Citrus and Hernando, that kind of information is very limited. So a lot of the elevations for assets, I have to derive them from just like a digital elevation model instead, and use elevation certificates where I can. One thing that we're trying to look at with the steering committee is like, should I be adding any, height to that bare earth to make it more realistic, or do we just do it like super conservative and keep the bare earth elevation? So that's where I'm at with elevation. The other thing that I've spoken to Russ about that is really tripping me up is how to capture elevations to do a meaningful sensitivity analysis for features that are linear or, areas like an evacuation route. I asked FDEP GIS about this, and their preference was that we capture everything as a point, which, for an evacuation route made, not the best sense to me.
Mhm.
Or, like larger areas of really important assets, like a nuclear power plant or something like that.
Yeah,
So
like
I
lowest
was,
point.
yeah, I was really curious. I've heard a few people doing this different ways, but I was wondering how you all were approaching that problem. And, if you want to add on anything about elevation certificates, that would be great too.
So, I just have like, I guess, two things I can share. One, obviously, we're not there yet for phase 2, and we'll be working with HDR on that process. So when we start talking about this with their team, I can provide, what our steps are moving forward. I will say for phase 1, I was investigating a lot of that data, and we have the old Pinellas County Railroad system that runs through the county, which we had as a linear asset. And I noticed in phase 1, which was conducted by WSP, they broke it up into segments when they did the elevation analysis, and then from the segment they had a center point, and that's what they picked for the elevation. So
That's pretty standard.
okay, so that was what I remember seeing for that, which ended up just being a lot of elevations for, again, the linear asset. And then I don't know how that goes on to be categorized when it comes to the sensitivity matrix. The other thing with our the other thing with our assets is we have some things that had standardized elevation. So for example, our ITS cabinets are constructed, they have like a concrete slab that's 2 feet above ground elevation. So we were able to find all of those data points and then add the arbitrary 2 feet to that DEM to give it its critical elevation, or if we want to call it critical elevation, it's I don't know, elevation. So there's some assets that we were able to speak with the data owners to get these standards, but like I said, it was a lot of data. We included everything. So there's some stuff that's just lying blank as of now, and we're not sure how to ground truth. So that's what I'll say.
How about you all at US or at USF? How are you approaching that issue?
I know Kendall was working on looking at the roadways and adding the DEM to those to look at the elevation changes with evacuation routes. We're gonna probably do a similar thing where some of the attributes have the height already in there. Like I think the year built for buildings also has the height in there. So I know we're going to use that, but honestly, we haven't really discussed.
Yeah, the year
Much
bill
more.
is sort of a proxy too, because it's by building code, the evolution of the building code. But yeah, it's a little bit of TBD, like still working out the details on that one.
Sounds like we're in a similar boat. It just seemed weird to me that, you know, if I had a polygon and that would be a better piece of data than what DEP had suggested to me, which was to create the center point of that polygon, which might not even be at a critical place like the front door, you know?
Yeah, right.
So that it just seems odd to me that you know, that part isn't thought out. And you know, I've seen a lot of people just exclude the elevation for line and polygon features, and that was accepted by FDEP. I was just really it's really tripping me up because I don't know how meaningful that, you know, like that end analysis is for the community. So that's definitely something I wanted to write up for them, and why I wanted to see how you all were tackling it.
That's a great point.
Part of that also is so how do I say this gently? Attendance isn't representative of the whole community, right? So in a smaller area, you would be able to ground truth it with people's experiences, like what is your flooding experience driving from here to here, right? Or this is the point that we're modeling. Is that real? But our representative population isn't big enough to do that for something like Hillsborough County.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks for your feedback on that one. The other thing that, and you know, I talked to Ali about this at length, is that something weird that is called out in the statute is, you know, like, hey, look at your critical and regionally significant assets. And I'll make a long story short, is that FDEP had approached all the RPCs in the state to capture regionally significant assets, and that it's kind of being rethought out now. I don't have a lot of updates since the last time we talked, Ali, but one thing that when I came to like really look into the data from that was captured by a consultant for FDEP for the statewide data set is that they were capturing regionally significant assets, but there's no like required attribute in the VA scope of work guidance about like local communities capturing regionally significant assets. And I was wondering if you all are, you know, because since that is called out specifically several times in the statute, like regionally significant assets, are you capturing that? Are you flagging that for all your critical assets?
I don't think we added an attribute
Okay.
We
in
haven't.
that.
We haven't either.
Okay. Yeah, it's like to catch USF up on this is like, I'll give you like the example I've been giving everybody is like in the statewide data set, like one of my jobs was for our region was to QC like what that consultant that FDEP worked at deemed as regionally significant or not. And like one thing that was deemed locally significant was TPA, and obviously the airport is regionally significant. Like
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
like a no-brainer. But you know, it's just something that I wanted to talk to FDP about is like, who are the folks who are, you know, is it going to be up to the RPCs and all their member governments to decide what is regionally significant? I just thought it was weird that it was excluded from the required attribution and kind of the scope of work guidance, but it's called out several times as something that's important to FDP.
Yeah, and it's in
So-
the implementation grant criteria.
Mhm.
So is
Yeah,
it
'cause
regionally like population served, boundaries touched? I mean, there's nothing,
right.
no definitions.
I was gonna ask how, if there's any definition in there, if it's just,
Yeah, there in the statute for resilient, like what is it, 1954 or whatever, they have, you know, it is like Allie was just saying, it's something like spanning multiple here, I'll drop it in the
I
chat.
think that's what, yeah, spanning
Yeah.
jurisdictions. But that's gonna limit a lot of things.
yeah, evacuation routes.
Right.
Yeah, and that was another like glaring example of where the consultant didn't deem those as regionally significant. I was just like, well, you know, that's why they have somebody doing QC, I guess, but
They
it just
should
seems
put
weird to me that it wasn't thought of, and it might just be an oversight of, you know, like, what are the local jurisdictions saying is regionally significant? Because, you know, I don't know if you've all visited, it sounds like Ally has, you know, like the statewide critical asset viewer or the database. They kind of have it split into two separate sections. Like one is that statewide data set, and then they have combined all of the local jurisdictions into like, I think it's just like by like local points, local lines, local polygons. But that doesn't include anything about regional significance. So anyway, I'll keep you all up to date on that. And just, you know, how FDP plans to move forward with it. It's pretty much up in the air right now.
Yeah.
I have several more questions, but obviously I'm taking up a lot of space and I wanted to give you all room to talk about things that you might want to know from others on the call, or just anything you might want to share. I can certainly keep going too, but I wanted to give others time to talk through any issues that you might have.
Ashley, all of your talking points have been super relevant for what we're hitting our heads on the wall with.
Good.
So yeah, I appreciate how organized you are. So yeah, we're good to keep going with your points. I don't know about everyone else on the call.
Okay. That's really nice to hear. Thank you. How about you, Allie? You got anything?
Yeah, I mean, I know for a fact that the exposure analysis will most likely be the easy part once we get the data sorted out. It's really going to be coming down to what do we put in the sensitivity analysis for the metrics themselves, like the sensitivity indicators. We haven't really gotten guidance on those. I know that I think it's the CDC has like a list of specific social vulnerability indicators that we were gonna look at as far as incorporating that into our analysis. But um, I think what's gonna happen is we're just gonna look at what are our major facilities that are being inundated and looking at those more closely in the adaptation plan. Um, we do have like a capital improvements program, which has all of our county projects that are looked at over a 7-year period. So we're gonna see like where those lie in um, the exposure analysis, and then we're also gonna look at like larger scale programs that may need to be implemented. Like if we find that 80% of our lift stations are gonna be inundated, then maybe we create like a lift station adaptation, in-depth adaptation uh, analysis for the adaptation plan. So I'm just like very unsure what the adaptation plan is going to look like, what we're going to be focusing on. I would just assume that it's going to be our larger scale assets, which is fine, but and we'll always have the data sets with the smaller assets because those are the things that people still care about in other departments. They want to know what's going to happen. It just might not be looked at in the adaptation plan per se. So I don't know, Allison, if you guys have started looking at your sensitivity criteria.
I'm just starting, so we're going through all of our assets right now. And we are looking at, I'm honestly just making a big Excel sheet and taking note if it intersects or not.
Okay.
I'm probably doing about the same thing, looking at major facilities.
Okay.
But we are also in the early stages. We have a couple just like, without even looking at the maps, adaptation plans that maps that we want to incorporate just because we know that, like for instance, like gas stations and evacuation routes, or we're looking at hotels and the
Nice.
evacuation, but we're about in the same boat.
Okay. And
Yeah.
what were the social, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, just to sort of add on, and I think in Pinellas County you have similar, but we're also in the place where we're trying to coordinate with the 3 cities, the airport and the Port of Authority, who all have their own VAs. Well, port and the cities and the airport. So I think part of the sensitivity criteria also is going to be a little bit more of a process for aligning that with the cities and the port especially and the airports.
Yeah. Yeah. I just don't want the smaller assets to get left behind, but
Yeah.
it happens. I think so we just deployed our survey, and we're going to all these, we have hurricane exposures that we are hosting weekly in different municipalities. So we're trying to collect feedback and we're seeing like what gets ranked as assets and community, what assets the community values. So maybe that will help drive like some of the sensitivity, like if they do decide that museums or public spaces are ranked high on their values, then we may try to leverage that in the sensitivity. But one of the things that I think the CDC had was like obviously the demographics, the um, underserved and at-risk communities as intersecting with some of those assets. So we might look at that and trying to think of the other one. It'll come to me eventually.
Yeah. Are you talking about like the HVI, like their kind of vulnerability index?
I think that's what it is.
Yeah, I think they have it organized now into 4 different quadrants of
Okay.
they rearrange the buckets from time to time. But yeah, we are last time we did it, it was a lot more than the SVI. It was, looking at individual population, at-risk populations. I think a lot of it came down to vehicle, I'm forgetting the word right now, but households with no cars
Oh, yeah.
was a big one.
Cool.
And that sort
That's
of
a great one.
overlaps with households with lots of people under the age of driving and over the, like, a certain age.
What would that be, like
and
low mobility? I wonder what that's called.
It's vehicle,
I'll say it.
I say it 5 times a day and I'm blinking right now.
That's all right. It's 3:00.
Yeah, yeah.
The census, they just call it households with a lack of vehicle, but it's just
Cool.
like transportation
This
access.
transportation disadvantaged is
Oh,
what we call it. Yeah,
Love that.
yeah.
We also are doing lack of internet access too, to
Mhm.
see who's not gonna get those, initial warnings and communication.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
The other one that overlaps with that a little bit is, when we did this last time, Karen uses this example a lot, but the neighborhoods that are shelter in place,
Mm-hmm.
most of them are LMI and older housing infrastructure. So, or especially in Hillsborough County, a lot of trailer parks.
Okay.
So that kind of overlap of like mixed messaging, right? So people at this point, hopefully people know if they live in a mobile home, they need to evacuate, but kind of the target populations and neighborhoods and high concentrations or high population density. I
Yep.
don't know if this is
No.
helping or.
This is very helpful
Yeah.
because I think adding in those factors can help, again, justify moving different assets higher on your adaptation list than it just being about infrastructure.
Right.
You know what I mean? The other
Yeah,
thing is, so you're
yeah.
doing it on behalf of Hillsborough County, and this is something that at Pinellas County I've been struggling with. Some of the assets that we've included are private. So I don't understand how we're going to be, I guess, partnering with those facilities if we did want to tackle like implementation funds. Like, for example, like hospitals are private industry. So if we find that they intersect with like a transportation disadvantaged community or a high concentration community, I don't really know what the next steps are moving forward. So it does make us only, at this time, we're probably only going to look at assets that we own and maintain. So I don't know if you guys are doing that as well.
So because we are USF, we sort of, we like scope creep. And we get to look at more of that. So we're in a place where we can make recommendations like, hey, how about this coalition of food pantries that are privately owned or nonprofit, right? And say like, work together in these community hub solutions.
Okay.
So we are just going with it.
Yeah.
I've seen a number of kind of examples looking through all the plans that are now being popularized where they're recognizing how important it is to bring private industry in, both for
Yes.
hurricane response, but also recovery. So
Yeah.
I think, yeah, like EDC, the Economic Development Corporation, might be a good partner in that for if we're picking off projects for partnerships, and then, but like get your house in order and then talk to.
Same.
these.
Yeah. So that's what we're trying to like figure out. We're gonna get our house in order, like make sure that we have everything prepared
All buttoned up.
But yeah, so that kind of limits us. Like we've included all these private assets that we were able to get a hold of in our geo database, and we'll run the exposure analysis, but it won't carry over to the sensitivity task. And we are happy to like reach out to those private industries and provide them with, again, the exposure data sets. But I like your idea of the community hubs, and also something that came to mind are all of these regional grants that are coming out. They want it to be multifaceted. They don't want just a stormwater project anymore. They want it to include
Right.
multiple aspects into these projects. So it's a good opportunity to leverage those partnerships. So yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it too, for sure. And then how are you including, I mean, it's not infrastructure, but like housing authorities, where do they fall in?
Yeah, so we've included our mobile home parks as low income housing units. And then I pulled a data set from, I think it was either USF or UF, that compiled other low income housing within the area.
It was probably Schimberg, the housing.
Yeah.
Yes,
at
that's
Assisted
exactly what it is. Yeah,
Hey, I
That was
did.
Russ, right, Russ?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Hey,
a great,
Russ,
it's a
thanks.
great resource. Yeah.
Thanks very much. Yeah, anything open source we could find, we were just like, download, this'll work. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
for sure.
and then our
Well,
emergency management had a couple other areas that they just knew were, again, kind of like the disadvantaged, the lower income neighborhoods and things like that. So we have those areas mapped, but in polygons. So again, I don't know how that's all going to work out.
just what's interesting, if I can just jump in for a second, just
Mhm.
sitting over here on the fence, is how you all are dragging in a critical component that's been left out of this whole process, right? Is, actually people.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the focus on infrastructure is super cool and all. That's great. It's important.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the people.
It's the people, yeah, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it's very interesting. Thank you for that. Thanks for that perspective.
Yeah.
This is for Ally, and if USF knows how this came to be, but for the social vulnerability aspects of the projects you're working on, uh, I'm guessing that might have been driven by the steering committee. And the thing that I want to know is, I don't know if you have any sense of, do you feel like the funding that was provided by FDEP for the grant like covers this, or is it just something that, like the stakeholders are willing to eat because they feel like it's an important aspect to look at in terms of vulnerability?
So for our grant, there's nothing in there that says anything specific about what sensitivity criteria we're supposed to use. Like I think it says like if applicable, like if you can find it.
Yeah.
So yeah, we scoped with HDR up to 10. I don't know why we picked 10. I can't even find 10 resources, but we said like up to 10 sensitivity factors. And so it would be countywide data sets that we could get our hands on that has the social economic um, perspective to incorporate it into the sensitivity analysis. And so we're going back and forth with like where to find that data, what is it specifically. So yeah, I really like the transportation disadvantage because there's a huge greenway trail in Pinellas County. That's how a lot of people in the low income community get to work, get to um, grocery stores and all of that, whether that's through walking or through bicycling. So I really like that one, and I'm wondering how we can leverage that. Um, the lack of internet is an interesting one. I don't even know where to find that type of data set.
So I can share with you, it's in the ACS, like the Tiger line, long list of everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I will give you what code it is right
Okay.
now.
Allie, the other one is limited English, households with limited English.
Okay. We
And that,
definitely have a huge Vietnamese population in our central part of the county, so that would be awesome.
yeah.
Ellie, I'm looking up where I got it from and I'll just pop it in the chat and tell you
Okay.
what the long number code is.
Cool. Perfect. Yeah, actually, so to answer your question, again, being recorded, but I think that the hopes with DP were that the communities were just going to complete these assessments to the best of their ability with what they have, which is why the updates kind of made the data sets generic, because I think that communities were overwhelmed. For some of us that are geeking out a little bit, we want to include a lot more than what has been outlined. So, I think this conversation is great, and I really appreciate you guys providing all of these ideas, because that was one thing that we're struggling with. We're so far away from it, but it's going to come up fast, and it takes a long time to access data. So this is great.
It does take a long time. And neither one of us were here when the first round of vulnerability assessment was initiated, but we focus on the built environment and people in it. And then we were partnered with public health, the school public health, and they were instrumental, right? They were doing the LMS at the same time, and it was so impactful on the assessment itself because I came in at the tail end of the last assessment, and it made such a difference in the way that our recommendations unfolded and the social services that we were able to work with in the county.
Yeah.
I think it wasn't scoped, but there was never a question that we wouldn't do it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So the first kind of iteration, if it was really the first, or the previous one to this of the vulnerability analyses was not as specifically defined, but they did mention social vulnerability in there, which they don't really mention in this one, right?
Right.
They get near it by talking well, it's all pretty much physical assets, and they mention affordable housing, but that's about as close as they get. Because
Yeah.
on that previous iteration, I did a similar thing to what you all are talking about in terms of bringing in SBI data and looking at
Cool.
that kind of info.
I remember that from the REACH grant.
Yeah, for example, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
anyways, it's very interesting. But so the in the consulting world nowadays, and then I can equate almost the consulting world somewhat with the municipalities and counties that have fewer resources, in that they're financially constrained, right?
Yeah.
So it's it's interesting to listen to you all talk about how you actually want to make this a workable plan,
Right.
but the funding isn't necessarily provided to enhance it in the way that you guys are discussing it, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like stated before, if we don't own or operate the asset, there's really nothing that there is things that we can do, but it wouldn't be as efficient with our
Yeah.
time and funding that we have available.
Yeah, and related to that, so I did, when I've done the exposure analysis and the sensitivity analysis, I included the private facilities when they were provided, but what the ultimate sort of impact and implementation and outcome of that might be, like a private lift station. I mean, it may be critical.
Right.
It's going to be exposed, but
Hospitals.
yeah, I don't know how where you go with that, or like dry cleaners, that's another one. So I
Oh
don't know
yeah.
what you do with these things. Right?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of our schools are shelters, so we're able to um, really look at schools in depth, and so that's a double-edged sword because we can get schools and shelters. But then when it comes to the private institutions like the colleges, community colleges, and so on, again, we just don't really have the means to do that ourselves as a county. Um, and then the other thing, apart from the social indices, which is this is still aligns with it, was heat. We wish we could have looked at heat. A lot of this is about flooding, which is great, but again, in
Yeah,
Pinellas County, we're 98% built out, and it's
Mm.
hot.
Yeah.
It's really hot, and we really need some refuge and some shade um, areas that can be utilized by the community. And so it would have been a great opportunity to incorporate that, but because that wasn't really covered under the statute, we didn't
yeah,
incorporate it.
yeah. But these are good things to capture in your experience, right? To try to put forward, from the
Let them know.
on the private side, but from the governmental perspective of like, how could this program be better and more impactful, right?
Yeah.
So that they're, it's though I don't think we're allowed to say it much anymore, but this idea of climate change is
All right.
more than just flood related events, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm Yeah, I'm really glad that y'all brought the heat up and gave some background on,
Yeah.
you know, social vulnerability being part of looking, you know, before Resilient Florida, because I didn't know that, because I was just looking through, as you were talking, I was looking through the statute, and like, they only say social once, and it's just like,
Yeah.
in a generic sense, you know,
Yeah.
it doesn't, you know, call out looking at that specifically.
It doesn't say like if applicable. Didn't it say that
Yeah, this is
somewhere?
I mean, I was just using Control F,
Yeah.
Ally, so
Okay.
I
Well, it's
was
like
just
if
looking,
applicable, of course it is. Like,
yeah.
what
But I
does that
was just
mean?
looking for social, and
Okay.
I was like, I didn't see anything else besides what I just stuck in the chat, and I was like, that's so weird.
They might have
Um,
called it like other sensitivity
Oh,
criteria or
okay.
something like that,
Yeah,
like
right, but I
sensitivity
mean, that's the
criteria.
measurements. Yeah, and with a, you know, with limited budgets, I mean,
Right.
Yeah,
you know,
Sensitivity for us is going to be like point of failure, cost. You know, it's going to be those very, again, the built environment sensitivity factors that we are looking at, like, you know, risk of failure, things like that.
mhm.
It's not going to be the social. So that's why we're really trying to push to get some data sets. So thank you, Allison. Thanks, guys. That's awesome.
yeah, on the pragmatic side too, if you don't mind, I don't mean to be overbearing, but I would, if you haven't already, as you're building these databases and then doing the exposure analysis, I would recommend, you know, reading ahead through what they're considering a sensitivity analysis, which is, you know, limited, but very specific in terms of what they're looking for in terms of an outcome. And so if you're aware of that before you complete the exposure analysis, it might help you somewhat. And,
Gotcha. Is that
and
coming out of the grant
that comes
eligibility?
out of the guidance that they,
Okay.
you know, provide, right? That
Yes.
whatever they.
And didn't they just update this? So they just updated the adaptation planning. Did you know
Yeah, there
about that?
was like a couple weeks ago,
This is more this is that scope of what's it called, the
oh,
standardized vulnerability assessment scope of work guidance, right?
Got you. That one.
That
Yep.
gives you the, you know, the snippets of what, you know, an acceptable deliverable might be. And
That's
so,
right.
for
Yeah.
example, you know, if you look at the exposure analysis has one sort of categorical scale of, you know, low, medium, high, but the sensitivity analysis also has low, medium, and high, but it means a completely different thing. And so, you know, it's from a, you know, building a database perspective, it's just good to have those things in mind
Yes.
as you're going through it. And
yeah.
if I could also add one other thing I should have mentioned on
Mm-hmm.
the elevation side, and this was just one approach, you know, the one that I took, but I'm not necessarily advocating. But when you're talking about polygons and linear features, right, you're very much limited by, you know, the scale of that or size of that polygon. So if you take a centroid, this, you know, how representative will that be? Or if you have depending on where you get the data, these linear features like evacuation routes are segmented by maybe roadway mile or something. But
Oh, yeah.
those again are pretty spotty. So I built my, I essentially took the DEM and then just built like a giant exposure grid that had all of the, you know, high tide flooding, the sea level rise scenarios, all that junk, all built into it. And then I used the cells. So I used the roadway to select the cells that intersected with the roadway and then took an average of that. And so that gave me elevation, but then also exposure level at, you know, a greater resolution than you might have found in the linear feature. So
Thanks for sharing that,
Got it.
Russ.
Thank
I
you.
had kind of forgotten about that.
yeah, yeah, that discussion. I would remind you again
Yeah.
next time we talk to you.
No, that's a good way. I mean, I was so hung up still on like, you know, just the conversation with FDEP on that. I had kind of forgotten about, you know, that was good advice that you gave.
Yeah, bless their hearts. They were
I'm
missing.
recording, Russ.
That's all right. They've heard from me. So, yeah, I mean, as far as like taking the point versus the polygons. So like you take an airport, for example. So like for
Right.
our local airports, the PIE, and if you put a point in the center, all of the runways that are closer to the bay are going to be misrepresented.
Yeah,
And
exactly, right?
if the
Yeah.
runways are flooded, which I get it, eventually it'll move out, but for that period of time, it's just misrepresented if you use that point.
Yeah, but if you chop that up into a bunch of
I like
smaller
that.
cells, right?
Yeah,
Then
and then you take an
you decide
average
if
of
you
the
want to try
cells.
an average, or you can actually, spatially depict the exposure, right, across the entire site. So
I like that.
just a thought,
That was very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I was, yeah, thanks, Russ. I'm just looking at the time. I don't want to go over since this is like hour-and-a-half marathon. But I did want to ask you all, do you think doing stuff like this in the future would be helpful to you? Well, that's good to know, because so the grant that so I don't know if you all are familiar with this. It's in the statute, but I'm just gonna drop it in the chat. So the grant that TBRPC got to do this kind of work for technical assistance and like collaboration across jurisdictions and all that, it's what they call an RRE grant. So they consider the RPCs now a regional resilience entity, and it's like a different pot of money than, like Ally at Pinellas County got for their VA, which is like a planning grant.
Yeah.
And coincidentally, just today, FDEP, they pitched to us, they were like, hey, do you want to do technical assistance for your region? Internally, we have been kicking around the idea of maybe doing one or both of these ideas, like kind of have like a VA working group, so we can hash this stuff out together. The other thing I was kind of thinking was, I think Ally, kind of alluded to this earlier, is maybe like having maybe a more of like a GIS centric group where we can, collaborate on like what data to use or, whatever. So, or maybe that's just like one big group together. I don't know, but I just wanted to gauge the interest in doing something like that. Just
Yeah.
hearing you talk, Ally, with USF, I was like, that seemed really helpful just right there.
Super helpful. I
Okay.
think it would be cool too if you could find people that are in that exposure sensitivity task, like
Mhm.
or are right about to start or have just finished, because that's where really the meat of the conversation is happening. Because there is already a group for the educational stakeholders. So if we could get like the meat of this project and be able to see what everybody's doing, would be really helpful. So
Yeah,
thank
I
you.
think it's awesome idea, Ashley, and it's very, very logical to centralize this stuff at the regional planning council level. For crying out loud, that is what, you're supposed to be doing anyway, right? So,
Yeah, I think that at least RPC, our TBRPC, like, I think they kind of had a little bit of a identity crisis and, before, like now resilience is sort of becoming like the brand of the RPC. So it makes sense to be working in the vulnerability assessment space. Ally, you just said that there's a group for education, like for the stakeholder. Is that like, I think Kara and Amy from my side are working with y'all on
Yes.
that. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so I feel like sometimes, I feel like when this started, we were off like being rogue. So to find
Yeah.
that you guys are hosting these conversations is great because, well, we don't want to create the wheel. We just want to follow what everybody
yeah,
else
right.
is
Why
doing.
can't-
Yeah, right.
If the wheel is working.
Yes.
Exactly. So so I'm a part of the stakeholder engagement group with Amy Bidwell, right?
Yeah.
And Kara. So
Okay.
that's been helpful because we found out that nobody goes to public events anymore if it's for one thing.
Yeah.
So we started going to the community to events that are already attended to meet people where they're at, and we're already getting better results. So
But maybe something like this where it's like the more technical end of things would be helpful to hash out with like other folks. Okay. All
yeah.
right, cool. All right, well, let's end it then. I really appreciate you all joining and hanging in there for an hour and a half. I have a bunch of resources that I wrote down that I need to send to you all. And I'll follow up with you on that. Is there anything else before we sign off?
Is the engagement group still meeting?
They had like 2 or 3 of them. I could reach out to Kara and see if they're gonna have any upcoming ones. I would assume that they are, just because there is that pre and post stakeholder like you guys are doing. So
Yeah,
I would think
would
so.
I wouldn't mind joining those. I don't know, Ashley, if you can just ask Kara to
Yeah,
tack on. But yeah, it's because the scoping from DEP was like, you're gonna have 2 meetings and then you're done. Everything's great. You heard from the community, and it's more work to go out to the meetings, but I do agree that I didn't even, yeah.
We requested it. We had to like reach out to the state and we're like, listen, it's not working for anybody. So can we do this? And they were like, yeah, sure, as long as you can provide the same deliverables, which is pretty much just people attended. And so we're using a clicker because we can't write down people's names. So we're just counting how many people we interact with.
Oh,
Smart.
that is smart.
Yeah, I
That's
know. So that's what I'm saying. I feel like as we're doing these, we really need to learn from each other.
Yeah, like even if we had like a lessons learned roster or an ongoing list of like, hey, I went roller skating and that was really effective, or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah,
No,
and I
that's good.
think it's going to become a really sensitive topic up until November. So let's figure out a way to communicate effectively,
Okay,
not freak people out. And, yeah.
all right. Well, great. Thank you all so much. I really
Thank you,
appreciate you doing
guys.
this.
Thanks,
you.
Ashley.
Yeah, thank you, Ashley, so much. Megan, it's nice to see you again. I know you're at the co-production.
Yeah.
Well,
Bye,
I'll
guys.
send
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Russ.